Now, I want to address one last thing because it's brought up all the time. We keep hearing the term Palestinian and the Palestinian people. And what exactly does that mean? Why is it being used? Where does it come from? And I'm going to link in the show notes for the video. I'm going to post a link there that really kind of goes into a lot of the history of this, but I think it's very, very important that we really kind of make sure that we understand the terms that are being used here. So in modern day terms, they will refer to the, quote, Palestinians in the same way that you would talk about any group of people with a government. And so what we would have to ask, okay, if some place can be a government, then that would mean that there would be a government structure, a president or a king or something, or there would be some kind of a history in the land. There would have to be something that would give the impression of an actual nation. So where does the term Palestine come from? You can go back and do a lot of study of the term, but it's quite ancient. And it really kind of comes from variations of how they would look at what would be Philistia, or the kind of the coastal people that lived there, what we would call the Philistines. So at the time when Israel was in the land, there was no question it wasn't called Palestine when David was the king of Israel. So as long as there was a nation of Israel, then that would be the easier way for them to understand it. So when we think of all of the history of the children of Israel in the land, Israel's usually what's called. They were displaced in 70 AD. It's still the land that God had given to them, but it's now a displaced people. And think of all of the nations that have ever been among mankind that we would know that there was a king of such and such a country. Think of the Hittites and you know, these ancient peoples that they had rulers and they had territories, they had coinage, they had all kinds of history where they were the sovereign in that particular land at that particular time. So it would be known by them at the time. You would know the area because that's the people who live there, they govern there, and they have a history in that place. So in the displacement of Israel, though it's still Israel as far as the land is concerned, as far as God is concerned, they're displaced from it. So is it going to have a different name? Interestingly enough, when it comes to it, it was always really under the control of someone else. It was part of a larger empire, and that was kind of the way through from the displacement. The Romans had it for several hundred years after that. Not long after that, it started being fought over between Christians and Muslims for hundreds of years, and then I kind of just fell into other people's hands just through the ages. So they would refer to it as some particular plot of land, some particular area of the world. So if you're a person there, if they referred to it as Philistia or Palestine, it's just speaking about a particular territory, but there's no real government there. So you can find that the Romans referred to it as Palestine as far back as the 2nd century. So you go back and read the history on it, it's pretty easy. It was still part of the Roman Empire. It was just a province that was out there that they didn't really care a whole lot about, and they called it Palestine. There was a real hatred of the Jews. There was a war that they fought where they dispersed and destroyed Jerusalem, and they destroyed and displaced the Jewish people, and they took the area. Now, it had been under their control anyway, but they just did away with them. So we know that there is a supernatural hatred for the people of Israel. The Jewish people has always been. And so the idea that there would be real animus at the hands of the Romans towards the people who lived there, so they just started calling it by the name of other people who had lived there. So the Philistines were a thorn in the side of the nation for years and years and years, all the way back to David's time. So again, when we talk about what was Palestine, what had it been through the years, it was just speaking of a territory. So if you were a Jewish person at the time, you can't say that you were Jewish from Israel. You would say that you're a Jewish person living in the land that was formerly known as Israel, but at the time it was known as Palestine. So you'd be a Palestinian Jew, Palestinian Christian, Palestinian Muslim, whatever you want to say. They called it Palestine, but there really wasn't any kind of a governing. There wasn't a king. Like I say, there wasn't an express territory with borders of its own sovereign nation. There wasn't a government. There weren't denominations of coin for that. So that's why you have no history of Palestine. You have a history of Israel, and then you have a history of the people who occupied it, and it was just a territory of the nations from that point on. So when we get into the modern time, The term Palestinian is just picking up on what's always been, and they're trying to apply it to a group of people. Yasser Arafat really kind of made that a thing in the 60s and 67, creating 64, creating the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and so he started using the term of the Palestinian people. Well, they aren't a people, and he wasn't a ruler, he wasn't a king, he was just a propped up person who was really just ultimately a terrorist. And they recognized his organization because, again, there's the hatred of the Israeli people, the hatred of Jews is millennia old. So the idea that he started using the term Palestinian as though it somehow was ever a nation or ever a functioning government has never really happened. So that idea that there is a Palestinian people, they're not from Palestine. They're not Palestinian people because that's never existed. They may be from Jordan. Look at what was said by Abdul Rahman back in, I think, 1948. The plan was, when Israel was going to be declared a nation, there were nations who came against them. Lebanon, Egypt, Syria, Jordan. And the plan was, if they could just kill off this fledgling nation, again known as Israel, they were just going to divide up the land. So Egypt would get that desert portion that's in the south, and the whole southern portion of what's modern day Israel. Jordan would get what we call mainly the West Bank, and Lebanon would be able to get more of the coastal stuff, and Syria would get the Golan Heights and the Galilee, and that was how they were going to divide it up. So that was the plan. And so they weren't looking to make a nation of Palestine. They were going to just take the territory for themselves. They were going to divide up Israel. They couldn't divide up Palestine because there's never been a Palestine. So what we want to make sure is that we're careful with our terms. We can say it was Palestine in just the way of saying it was kind of a way of describing an area that was controlled by someone. Ottomans for a few hundred years, the British for a very short amount of time. But just look through the history from the time that they were displaced by the Romans in 70 AD, and it was always under the control of someone, but it was never its own government. The actual land itself was promised by God to Abraham well beyond its borders at any time that it's ever had. Genesis 15 will tell you what that's supposed to be. It's well beyond its borders that it's ever occupied. But be that as it may, it was never a functioning government. From the time that they were displaced by the Romans, it always fell into the hands of whoever was that controlled that part of the world. But it was never the capital. It never had a government. It never had any of those things. It was always just a province. So the idea of calling it Palestine was meant as kind of a poke and as a pejorative and a way of mockery of Israel and of the Jewish people. And so when Yasser Arafat picks up the term, now everybody's starting to use it. The UN loves to popularize it. They still use it today, that now we get this whole two-state solution. Do you realize that if there ever turns out to be a king or a government of, quote, Palestine, if it ever happens in the future as a part of a, quote, two-state solution, that will be the first time in history that an actual functioning government of a state known as Palestine has ever existed in the world. So what you had in Gaza was their opportunity to maybe finally do it, and instead they just elected a bunch, if they even did the elections anyway possible. It looks more like the people from Hamas took over control of Gaza. That was your possibility for a two-state solution. We see how that worked out. So we want to make sure that we understand the terms. Once again, can you use the term Philistine, or I'm sorry, Palestinian, and just say, we call ourselves Palestinian? If they did, we call ourselves Palestinian because we are people who belong to the nation of Palestine, based upon the government of Palestine, the history of Palestine. None of that stuff exists. It's never been a nation. It's never been a people. It's only been a province and an area. And again, whatever you may have been at the time, you could have been a Palestinian Jew, a Palestinian Christian, a Palestinian Muslim, because you were living in an area known as Palestine, but it was never a government. It was never a nation. It was just an outlying province. So interesting stuff. If you have any questions on any of what's been shared today, certainly if you're interested in any way about the trip to Israel, I'd like to hear from you as soon as possible. We need to get some reservations made and make provision for it. So you can contact me through the ministry's website. That is oldpaththeology.net, and you can send me an email through that. And I look forward to seeing you.